So, Paul, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into the future, can you quickly tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Sure, Doc Nick, and thank you very much for having me on and chatting to me, and I feel very humbled and privileged. I was born in Port Elizabeth, and then we moved to Johannesburg, and for the better part, pretty much all of my life, I've grown up and was educated in Johannesburg, and that's it. I'm a Joburg boy, born in Port Elizabeth.
Right.
That's his.
And tell us, Paul, what was your dream career when you grew up?
Like all young men or young boys, we always have these sort of dreams into the future of what we expect ourselves to look like, and I was no different. My dream job was to be an architect, and I've had that dream since when I was 5, all the way up until sort of finishing matric. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out that way, but yeah, it's still a dream of mine, and maybe one day I'll accomplish my dream and go back to university and become an architect.
Right. And tell me, who inspired you in your early days?
My big inspiration was my grandfather. He gave me some lessons in life, and was able to pass on some nuggets of wisdom, which I took to heart. And then later on in my life, more recently, was a young lady, which I'm quite sure you know, Mala Yousafzai, the Pakistani girl who defied the Taliban for equal rights for women and girls around education. I think that was very inspiring to me, and I've learned a lot from that, and that was a big change in my life. So I think those two individuals, my grandfather and Malala, were the two biggest influences in my life to date.
Right. Now, Paul, today you are in charge of group data services at Nedbank. You started your career at IBM. Can you maybe share a couple of highlights of your journey and your career?
Sure. IBM was a savior and really formed the foundation to who I am today, and set the foundation to a lot of my later life success. When I joined IBM, it was very much a learning organization, and still is very much a learning organization. And they invested heavily in the individuals, and I've managed to build up a solid professional foundation through that company. And I worked for them for about 14 years, and I ended my career at IBM on a high. Well, at least I like to say it's a high, and certainly they gave me a lot of international exposure. I had the privilege of going to North Carolina and participating in a number of red books in the early days, which broadened my horizons greatly as a young man. You know, never been out of South Africa internationally in that context. And then I ended my career, and I was one of about 4 or 5 individuals selected in the Europe, Middle East, Africa region as a SWAT team, and I managed to travel around all over Africa, Middle East, and Europe. And our jobs were basically to go and rescue large IBM engagements that had failed for one reason or another, be it contractually, legally, delivery, quality, product. And that taught me a lot of skills around all dimensions of an organization, from contracts to negotiations, presentations, project management, systems integration. I've developed a very broad level of skill, and that stood me in good stead. And really a foundation to my inquiry mind as I am today. It was IBM. So I credit IBM greatly for shaping my early life. Nedbank,
yeah,
also a learning environment, a different context, obviously, and very focused on a corporate, traditional corporate environment that is very different to a supplier or a vendor-based environment. And I've had a lot of success even internally into bank, from systems integration to program management, project management, various technical skills. So I picked up another level of skills and competency at Nedbank, and both those dimensions certainly shaped who I am today in a large way.
And
And Nedbank also gave me the opportunity very early on to run massive, large-scale, technically complex programs, and I thank them for that. There was a great opportunity.
And Paul, what would you say was a turning point in your career?
A turning point in my career was the acceptance that learning is an ongoing basis, and made I came to that realization very early in my IBM career that to move up, to diversify one's skills, to participate in a global conversation. One of the things I realized very early on is you need to be more aware of a global context than you are in a localized context. And that realization in my mind shaped a lot, because obviously IBM is an international company, and they can ship you around the world wherever you like. And to be relevant in that context, you have to have a global mindset to survive and be successful in a role like I landed up playing. And certainly being conscious of the fact that there's different cultures, different peoples, different technologies, different approaches, and accepting that as all part of this big ecosystem we call information technology. And for me, that awareness, that awakening, that point of awakening, for me was quite significant. And I've taken that to heart through the rest of my career, 20 years on, and I continue following that. And it stood in good stead with me for many years, and will continue into the future.
And tell us, Paul, what is driving you today?
Very much associated to the previous question. There is so much to learn, and there's so much we don't know. And the surprising fact is, all this knowledge actually is free. We live in a world of massive disruption. We've got hyper communications. We've got massive platforms. We have an internet that's instantaneous. We've got portable devices that can connect us anywhere. And all this knowledge is out there, and it's free if you know where to look for it, and if you can ask the right questions, and if you can put yourself into that context. All of this knowledge, this worldly knowledge that we have, this experience we've been given and are privileged to have throughout and it's the pinnacle of human civilization to date. It's a gift, and it's all free, and it's easy, and it's instantaneous. What drives me is finding out more, understanding more, and learning to ask the question why. Why are these things the way they are? Why does cultures behave the way they do? Why do humans behave the way they do? Why do we do the things we do? Why do we innovate the way we do? And there's so much questions that you can answer and learn from. So really, I'm excited about that. I feel like I'm back in high school, learning things for the first time. I wish I had this perspective when I was younger, but certainly my craving to understand and learn about the world is greater than it's ever been. And there's so much we don't know, and it's all free.
Right. And Paul, looking into the future, what does the future of leadership mean to you?
The answer is in the question. Leadership is everything going into the future. It's the single biggest dependency we have to break the current contexts and molds that we find ourselves artificially controlled by. And that speaks to many dimensions: innovative thought, creativity, original thought, dynamic leadership. Why do leaders today continually make the same mistakes all other leaders do in the world, and it's repeated endlessly over and over in our current context? You look at the United States as an example of where we stand today and how their leaders are behaving, and you look at Europe. And why are we doing the same things? And you go back into history, and we're repeating the same thing. So for me, the biggest change element going into the future in this new disruptive world, and the challenges we face in our current context with COVID-19 pandemics, the social inequality, the financial instability, is it all boils down to leadership. The only things that are going to save us is leadership. And for me, that's the single biggest focus we as a civilization and a society need to focus on, is developing strong, capable leaders to go navigate this even more complex world that we now live in. And it's more fluid than it's ever been. And it's more dynamic than it's ever been. So we need fluid and dynamic leaders. And we really need to spend a lot of time developing that in the next generation.
And Paul, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
There's a few dimensions. One, you need to have a capability of awareness. You must be self-aware. You must understand yourself. You must be able to navigate yourself and your own challenges and perspectives. You must be globally aware. You must have understanding of the bigger truth and the bigger context. You've got to understand it. You can't just hear it. You can't just support it. You really need to start understanding the context at a deeper level than we normally do. And that covers all dimensions. It's political, it's social, it's financial in nature. You really got to understand those big dimensions and be aware of the context around you. So for me, learning to be self-aware, consciously self-aware, was a very big eye-opener for me. It's not just being aware. You've got to consciously be aware, and you've got to remind yourself, I need to be aware. I need to find out the context. I need to understand the context of the truth. And that only comes when you do it consciously. And that's the only way to rewire the brain. If it's been wired in the traditional forms, you've really got to pay attention and be conscious of the awareness and the bigger truths around context of the world, and develop a sense of curiosity. You've got to challenge everything you hear, and this is more important today with the amount of fake media, news media, out of context media, superficial conversations and news. You've got to be more aware of that particular context today than you ever have to, and you have to question everything you read and see, because a lot of what we see and hear is not actually factually correct, and it's slanted by cultural or political bias or misunderstandings, and you can't just accept that as the truth. You must understand it. So curiosity is an absolute must going forward into the future.
And Paul, talking about social media, how would you advise future leaders how should they go about navigating social media to build their own personal brands?
Again, I suppose that's got to do with an individual's context. I mean, social media people use as a tool for many reasons. They use it to build a brand. They use it to build their company. They use it to advertise. They use it to question and challenge. They use it to gain knowledge. So really, it depends on your perspective on how to use it. But there is an underlying pinnacle foundation to using any social media, and that is, you also need to be aware. Anything you say on social media, good or bad or indifferent, can impact people greatly by the words you say, because they might look up to you, they might aspire to be you. And if you say things, you're going to influence people. There's people that are followers that are going to follow you, and you must be cautious of what you say, and must be aware of your actions and the words you use, because they can have a significant influence across the platform and society. So my only advice to people who are using social media for whatever purpose or gain that they see fit, you've got to approach it with a level of integrity, and make sure you don't do it for selfish reasons. So, you know, when you influence people across an electronic media of any description, integrity is a must. So however you behave, make sure you behave with a level of integrity, and be aware of what you say and do could influence people that you would never have known of, that would have never, you would have never seen them or understood if you change them. But you do have an impact on people around you. So words are like the great philosophers. Words are sometimes sharper than swords. So use it with caution and be aware, and manage it with integrity.
Thank you, Paul. And tell us, what are some of the biggest challenges future leaders should expect to encounter in that year?
I think the biggest challenge any leader is going to have, even currently, let alone the future, is the resistance to change. Global societies or large groups of people, if they're inherently biased towards a view or a perception or a framework or a religion, are going to be very resistant to change going forward, especially if it goes against what they believe as a social entity or an individual's personal beliefs. So resistance to change that we are expected to do is going to be relatively high. So expect a lot of resistance, especially if you are talking the truths, because there's a lot of manipulation and egos in the world. And if you're speaking the truth, you're going to get a lot of resistance. And these new skills are applicable to all dimensions, both political, social, and cultural. And you must be aware of the biases people will inject, and there is bias all over. And that bias is going to create massive resistance towards future leaders, especially if they go against the grain and invoke radical transformation in various dimensions. So yeah, be very careful. I think the biggest challenge you're going to have is resistance.
Okay, so Paul, if you were to construct and design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in?
So yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. Typically, organizations, cultures try, and we've seen it in our local context in South Africa. We try to uplift, the education and the disadvantaged, and all we do is we manipulate the front end of the cycle. The degrees, the exams at the end. However, if you really, really want to change the way we educate, teach, coach, mentor, and foster leaders, you have to start at the beginning. And the beginning is when these youngsters first go to school and they're first exposed to thought processes. You've got to start there. And if I designed a curriculum, it would be a curriculum based very much on what Scotland did many years ago. I think it was around 2017, where they fundamentally changed a few of their subjects and their pillars within the education system, and injected a level of sort of lateral skills rather than the horizontal skills. So skills that are creative, skills that are open to debate, skills that teach people to tie different subjects together. They had more electives. They had open answered exams. So the real purpose around a lot of that education wasn't to get to the right answer, because the answer wasn't important. It was about the method of how you came to the answer that you derived. So lateral thinking exercises and skills and frameworks were very important in that context. And if I had to start again, and I'm very passionate about this, is we have to fundamentally change the way we start teaching our youngsters. We've got to change the way teachers, how we educate teachers, teach youngsters. We've got to create more horizontal creativity components that cut across multiple deep pillars of subject matter, where we invoke the ability for learners to ask why and create and formulate in their own context of their minds what the outcome of it is. So we need a lot more of those creative skills and frameworks than we have today. And not for 1 minute am I diluting the sciences or the maths or the deep pillars of education. But what we do need is a balance, and I don't see the balance today. We're very fixated on this Newtonian thought of education, where we have deep pillars, like you do maths and then biography and history. But we very seldom, and we see almost no subjects that cross all of those and bind them all together and allow the learners to formulate an experiment and formulate their own hypothesis using those dimensions of subjects we see. And, we have to see a lot more of the creative education at the very, very start of the education life cycle. I mean, I'll give you an example, and I won't be too long. I'll give you an example as a parent who has 2 children, and I've spoken to a lot of parents about this. And if you've got kids, this will resonate with you. A period that a child goes through when they are young, between 6 and 8, they have this notion when they ask their dad, wow, Dad, why is the sky blue? And then you say it's blue, and then they go, why is it blue? And then they ask why does it? That level of curiosity at a very young age all of a sudden stops. And it always fascinated me that the human, the youngsters are inherently very inquisitive as they're learning new things. And they always ask their parents, why? I mean, in my own personal context, it used to get very, very frustrating. My son used to ask me why 15 times. But when you stand back and you look at it, they're inherently curious. So what's wrong with our education system? All of a sudden, everybody I've spoken to, at some point, their child actually stops asking why. Right. Now, you must reflect on that. And I've got some theories, but that's for another discussion.
Right.
But,
well, Paul, thank you. Tell us, Paul, as a mentor to future leaders, can you share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
Yes, there's one that fits right in this mold, and this happened over about a year ago. I was at the office, and I was in a normal executive post, running around doing stuff and urgent. And the guy, a young black guy, a Nigerian guy, just joined us, and he just stopped and had a 5-minute conversation, and he asked me some questions, and he obviously found me fascinating. And then I was telling through a story in my life and what I've done and what are my learnings. And all of a sudden, this 5 minutes, conversation turned into an hour conversation. And, it was, I was happy, and he went his way and I went my way, until about 2 months later, I actually came across a blog, and I didn't know he was a blogger. And he wrote in his blog about this experience and this conversation and the learnings he took from me in this conversation we had, which, by the way, I didn't give, a second thought about it. It's a conversation you have in passing. And made me realize it made me realize one thing, that the words and the power people have as a leader and how people interpret that is a very, very dangerous thing. Now, I could have walked past in a 5-minute conversation, and I would never worried. And maybe the conversation could have gone the opposite way. And maybe I could have said something that fundamentally damaged his life, or he did something, and I wasn't aware of it. And it made me self-aware of the power of one's words, especially when people are looking up and you are leading people. You've got to respect that, and you need to understand that. And we've had subsequent conversations, and his brother he's a doctor in Boston, in the United States. And we've had further conversations, and we've both learned out of that interaction. I mean, I became more self-aware through that interaction, and so did he. And that was a very successful story, because a mentorship or a coaching engagement is a partnership. Both parties need to be enriched through that. And I found that's a great success story. That's almost a case study for in my mind, for mentoring and coaching. And both parties grew out of the engagement. And that is incremental growth across a society. Now, if you multiply that exponentially, where both parties, the coach and the coachee, both gained from the interaction, and you multiply that exponentially, imagine the power of that. And for me, that was a very successful example of an engagement I had with a coachee.
Thank you, Paul. And tell us, in your career, who are the role models of leadership that you've encountered, or maybe encountered in your learning journey, that you would recommend future leaders should learn from?
There's been many over my life, and I think a lot of it is time bound. You go through phases of your life where there are certain people that influence you and that become your mentors, and people that you guide you. And the older you get, they all change. But if I look back into my most recent experience, 3-4 years. There's two people specifically that I think are very relevant today, and one can learn a lot from, and that is Elon Musk, and not through the business sort of context of what he does and how he invents, but more from an Elon Musk is if you understand the way the man thinks. Now, if you dive a little bit deeper, and I'm not saying you must read a bunch of articles and watch a few podcasts around Elon Musk. That's not what I'm saying. But you start diving below the surface of the man, the leader, Elon Musk, and there is some stuff, and you've got to be aware of it. I think he's very fascinating, and he's a very complex individual. And I think there's some learnings there. The second person that makes a big impact to me is a gentleman by the name of Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's an astronomer out of New York, and is probably one of the world's top astrologers. And he covers many topics that resonate with me. And he talks about life and God and how to think differently and truths and all of those other things. He's a great guy to work on in the modern context. I think he's very in tune with the modern context of where humanity is, and the trends and the sciences and the educations and the personal leadership. So he's very, very current in my mind.
So Paul, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
I think it's the basics. I am active on LinkedIn and Twitter, and my mail. So I have a lot of conversations in sort of offline of social media, who people have connected to me within social media. So you'll find me on LinkedIn, and you'll find me on Twitter, and you'll find me in different places. I sometimes I write articles for different people and companies. IT Web, they like to pick my brains. There's Microsoft, there's the SaaS, there's a lot of sort of strategic vendors that you'll see me floating around on and participating in conversations. But generally it's LinkedIn and Twitter that you'll find me on, and and then conversations stem from there.
Right. And last but not least, Paul, what is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own life?
Yes. I think the most important thing from in today's context is implement an open mind. Be conscious, have an open mind, accept the truths, accept different views, and be conscious about it, and don't judge, but rather absorb. And again, also find your own truths. A lot of people don't find their own truths. They adopt other people's truths. They don't develop their own point of view. They adopt somebody else's point of view. And I think some of the skills a good leader must have is not just to adopt other people's skills, as they say, I believe in this because it's the thing, and an MBA sort of course told me that's the way it works and how I must think, therefore I adopt it. It's very important to interrogate what you hear, see, and believe, and formulate your own opinion. Have a voice, have a unique voice, and contribute something to society. Don't just regurgitate. So, in a nutshell, develop an open mind. Develop a lateral thinking mind. I personally like the concepts around quantum thinking and the ability to hold opposing views in your mind at the same time, because sometimes that gives you a different dimension, and maybe you'll find something that you never saw before. But accepting, have an open mind, develop a sense of empathy, develop a sense of awareness, develop lateral thinking. And these are conscious things that you must be aware of, simply because we were educated and trained differently. So these synapses in your mind have been wired in a certain way. Now, the only way you can rewire your brain is if you consciously exercise and think about it and participate in it on a daily basis. Then you can rewire your brain. But unfortunately, where we are today, even in my own context, your brain has been wired since very young. It's been wired to do things and think about things in a certain way. Very difficult to break out. So I would advise people to select those skills and consciously be aware of it, so you can rewire your brain, and that is how you're going to change leadership into the future. Is you have to unwire your brain and relearn.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership, and reminding us that we all have to rewire ourselves, our brains, and our leadership.
Absolutely. And you can't read an article on it. You can't read blogs, and you can't go to university, and you can't go to seminars. It starts with your awareness and your acceptance that rewiring must take place. You can't teach it. You've got to accept it. And that's why I tie the self-awareness components to it, because it can only change if you believe it can change and you want to change. It does not happen organically. So we have to accept the fact that we have to change, and we have to accept the fact that we need to do it differently. And when we do that, we can start the rewiring. But until then, unfortunately, the rewiring is always going to, the brain is always going to win if you're not able to accept it. So accepting it is the first step.
There we go. All right, Paul, thank you so much.